Thank you, everyone. Every day we turn on our phones, we recharge our smartwatches, we get our electric vehicles, we go to work, many of us already have them. And more importantly, it's not just our kids using ChatGPT anymore. We are also using it. And a McKinsey survey now shows that organizations that responded to their survey said that at least one business unit is already using AI. And what do all these things have in common? It's truly electricity. We're going to need more power than ever to be able to power the economy that we are creating. Earlier today, we learned a little bit about quantum computers, which are exponentially more powerful than the binary machines we have right now. The technology is expected to sort through large amounts of data and solve mathematical problems that would take regular computers days, months, or even years to solve. So we're here with a panel today to understand just a little bit of how big is this electricity need that we're going to have. If we say by 2030, maybe Calvin and Chris can help me out there.
Yeah. First off, let me just say good afternoon and thank you. You framed the question well, and the reality of it is it's a big issue. When you talk about in terms of, let me put it in terms of, for me and for those of you in Illinois, ComEd, our host utility here, we have seen a steady decline in load growth in Illinois or across our jurisdictions for a while, roughly about 0.54% degradation in load growth. Over the next 4 years, they're predicting about 1.3, 1.4% load growth over the next 4. So put that in perspective. That's enough load growth to power a small city, Oak Park, or over by Evanston. That's what we're talking about. That's going to happen just with the advent of all the load that's coming onto the system. And the amount of investment that's going to be required to get there is also significant. You talk in 2030, but put in perspective 2050, we're saying the new energy usage is all going to be electricity, over half of it. This is the type of load we have to get prepared and invest in this system and be ready to make sure it's reliable and resilient.
No, and so, Calvin said it well. I'm Chris Womack from Southern Company. We have 3 electric businesses down in the Southeast, and we have gas business up here at Nicor Gas here in Illinois, 2.3 million customers that we're very excited to serve. I think, as Calvin said, it's a big number. And we look down in our territory, we've been growing right around 1% for the past couple of decades. We see now, by the end of this decade, we see growth of upwards of 8%. And as we move into this next decade, some 12% growth, so double-digit growth in terms of electricity demand. So it's a big number. We're looking at putting about 10 gigawatts of power on the ground between now and the end of this decade, and we'll look at probably another 10 gigawatts by early 30. So it's a huge number, it's a huge demand, and we don't see the end in sight as of yet.
And we're talking about quantum here. We already have AI, we already have all the data centers and the growth that we talked about from electric vehicles and the electrification of everything. How does quantum add to that? Or could quantum be a solution, Darío?
Thank you. Darío Gil, I'm the director of IBM Research. And so let's parse that question a little bit. So first of all, as we talked about, quantum in connection with AI is part of this fundamental computing revolution. And the majority of the sort of power needs are going to be driven by this AI growth. Let's put some numbers on the quantum piece around that. If you look at current quantum computers that we build, they consume about kilowatts of power, a single machine. And even when we envision a few thousand error-corrected qubits, so sort of like large-scale machines, those are going to be in the megawatts. So now compared to these gigawatt level data centers that we're talking for AI, right? I just want to highlight the contrast around that. So that's interesting because quantum offers exponential advantage in terms of computing power for certain classes of problems. You can translate into energy. That means we can solve certain problems exponentially more efficiently from an energy perspective for some class of problems. So that's like one fact. But remember that in the future of computing, you're going to have classical and quantum working in concert. So the reality of it is that we're going to have all of these massive deployment of AI-driven data centers where quantum is going to be embedded and working in concert. So it is not going to alter the trajectory of the amount of energy need. We're still going to need to build all of these gigawatts of power. And then the last comment I would make in the relationship with energy is that the combination of AI and quantum is going to revolutionize how we do R&D. And one of the most exciting areas is applying that R&D capacity improvements to discover novel materials and novel chemistry that in its own right is going to have an impact for better battery technology and other aspects in terms of grid optimization.
Is there any example of something that's already being done with quantum that can help everyone understand? I would say maybe the average person like me understand?
Yeah, so there is a broad number. Matt Langdon was talking about a number of industries that are already engaged in this, but within the energy space, you've seen, for example, like E.ON working already with IBM Quantum Systems to do things like grid optimization, like multivariate optimization, acceleration. Optimizing the grid is a very complex sort of environment, and that's an example for potential advantage. And then on the sort of chemistry side of the equation, you've seen companies like Daimler and Mitsubishi Chemical, Lawrence Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley as well, working on novel chemistry for batteries, right? And developing sort of safer and more efficient battery technologies.
But even some of the new fusion ideas, concepts, and advances we're making around fusion is coming out of quantum. The work of quantum, I think, is really modeling the possibility and the opportunities there with future fusion development. So there are a lot of applications that we see forthcoming as a result of quantum.
That's really interesting. I think when we think about the average consumer is looking at all this and saying, okay, we're going to have to build all these new plants, we're going to need to invest. And a big question is affordability these days. I think we've seen with inflation over the past years what's going on in terms of the US population. I think it's really interesting to try to understand, how are we going to ensure that the companies that are developing technologies like AI, like quantum, or data centers get all the power that they need, and that consumer, the average citizen, isn't paying for that?
I don't know where you want to go. I mean, Kathleen and I were talking about it, and Calvin and I talk about it all the time. I'll say to you, if we don't get that right, if we don't get affordability right, there will be a revolution in this country. Okay, people are going to say, heck no, we're not going to do this because prices will be so out of control. And so we all have to make sure that as we move down the pipeline with these data center projects, that we figure out how to price them in a way that puts downward pressure on existing customer rates, that we make sure that as we work through this whole process that we keep an affordability at the center of considerations. Otherwise, we're going to have some serious issues.
I would just add that the issues in front of us right now, and when you look at the prices that came out yesterday, they're only going to continue to increase. Policy is very important because we have to get this right. And I wish I could tell you today that we have an answer for the short term. It's supply and demand. The demand is growing, we talked about that, and it's high. The supply is tight, so the prices are going to be high. So what are we going to do within this next 3-year window to stop that revolution, as Chris has just mentioned, because it's not going away? So the policy comes into, as these data centers and so forth get ready to build, to ensure that they are covering their share of the investment that is required, and that if they were to step away, you as a homeowner would not be left carrying that. And as we continue to go forward, can we secure deposits to make sure we protect? Because ideally, if you were bringing additional supply on and large customers, it would make the rates costs go down because you have more people using the system. So we have to get that supply to balance out with the need, and we'll get there. But that is not a short-term fix. It's going to take us 3 to 5 years at minimal, and maybe longer.
And for the benefit of the audience here, I just want to let you know, if you are not following the energy markets, the PJM auction, which is our biggest grid in the U.S., saw an price increase of 22% yesterday. So Kathleen, help us out.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Everybody points to Kathleen.
Yeah, so Chris and Calvin are responsible for getting the electricity to your homes through their poles and wires. My company, Constellation, actually makes the electricity. And of course, Chris's does too, since he's in a monopoly market. We're in a competitive market. But sure, we had an auction result yesterday. I think, what the market operator is saying and what we are expecting is year over year, it's about a % increase in terms of what it will mean to customers' bills, because that capacity auction is only one small part of what people pay, of course. The actual commodity, the energy they receive every moment is part of it, as is the cost of these poles and wires that we're having to build out to serve these customers. So that is going up as well. And it is a challenge that we have to balance, not just for our residential customers, but also for these new industries that are coming into the market. Electricity is such an important part of their input costs. We need to make sure that that is priced fairly too. So there are a lot of things that those of us up here who are sort of energy dorks are working on in terms of market design incentives to make sure that we're using the system effectively, and that we have incentives for people to use power when they need it, but not use it when they don't. Something like we call demand response or peak shaving, and we have some of those types of incentives in the markets. We need to make sure that they're as strong as possible so that we can use the system we have efficiently, that we add megawatts where we need it. Ideally, we try to add megawatts that are cleaner. And we know that's a thing that makes Illinois attractive to quantum and to data centers, is because we have such a clean grid here. And so we got to make sure all these things work together to make sure that we can power American prosperity and the growth and the benefit to humanity that will come from this technology.
So if I can, Kathleen brought up a good point. So for us, put it in perspective, 80% of our customer bill is the supply. But we do invest quite a bit in our system. Just some real broad numbers for you. As an industry, member companies, which Chris and I are, of Edison Electric Institute, we invested approximately $1.3 trillion over the past decade into the infrastructure of keeping the grid one of the most reliable and resilient in the world. We will invest $1.2 trillion over the next 4 to 5 years doing the same thing to that grid. Because as these new mega users come on, we were talking backstage, it doesn't matter where you are and so forth if the lights don't come on and the power is not reliable, because we're also forcing new headwinds where more storms are coming through. The tornadoes we have to have a resilient grid to combat those things as well. So absolutely, supply is an issue, but we must continue to invest all at the same time, or we're going to get this headwind where it's just not meeting the demand to make sure we have energy security and we can have a very dominant new world going forward.
I don't want to completely hijack where you were going, but I do think one thing I say all the time, and Calvin said it and Kathleen said it, and I also say there will be power. I mean, we're going to meet this demand. We're going to meet the moment. Now, the challenge, I think, becomes this balance of affordability, making sure we're doing all the things that we got to deal with this extreme weather that we see all across the country with storms and floods and all of the infrastructure things that we have to do, because we've got to make sure that we're on when you guys need us to be on, at the same time as we try to support our communities and our states to make sure we're doing the things to bring about economic development, economic expansion. We've got to balance all those things. And I think at the core of that, as there's a great sensitivity in the economy today about inflation, we just simply got to make sure that we're balancing this around affordability to kind of minimize that angst and that noise that comes with price increases that really shocks the system, shocks the economy.
You've talked a little bit about clean energy as well, and I think one of the things we're seeing is the political landscape is changing, and some of the tax credits for things like solar and wind will be phased out earlier. How does that change the landscape, and how do we meet demand if it's going to become a little bit harder to build renewables? Are we building more gas-fired power plants, and where do you actually see common ground on both sides of the aisle so that we can ensure that people have the electricity and the lights don't go off?
I mean, one point of common ground is the use of nuclear power. And, Southern has led with the only 2 units that have been constructed in this country in 30 years, going online in Georgia over the last couple of years. Both sides of the aisle support nuclear. But to your point about renewables, I think Illinois has really led the way. I mean, there was a nation-leading clean energy law passed before the IRA here in Illinois to provide incentives for wind, solar storage, batteries, things that will help keep the grid resilient and strong while fossil retirements occur. And so I think that makes Illinois a bit more resilient to the changes at the federal level because they have such a strong law in place here.
And I would say for me, the common ground is all around reliability and resiliency. We have truly taken an approach, all of the above. Nuclear is a great framework, but within the next 3 to 5 years, you have to involve solar. You have to have wind. You have to have gas. And states are going to have to make a decision on how they will provide this because it goes back to your initial question around affordability. Having said that, it's also very important that as you push this, I got a lot of backlash the other day when I said it, I think it was with your paper, Bloomberg, where I said, clean is no longer in vogue. What I meant was it was butting heads against affordability. Because to Kathleen's point, I want clean, but I need to afford it. And you need all of the above so I can, because it doesn't matter where it comes from if I can't pay my bill. And that's the headwind. And I said, it's still very important, but it has to be part of the whole discussion. And that's what I was referring to.
No,
I think
but
that consensus around affordability, reliability, and security, right, of our energy sources is sort of like the indispensable triangle with which we need to make progress on the basis of the investments moving forward.
No, but to Calvin's point about reliability, see, I think renewables, they play a critical role in reliability, but also they play a critical role right now from a supply chain standpoint. Because with all this kind of dash to gas and drill, baby, drill, I mean, there are supply chain challenges with gas, with turbines, with that infrastructure. And so as grids operate, you think about peaks, renewables can meet those peak needs around 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning or 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I mean, solar can work, wind can work, those renewables can provide great benefits to the grid during those periods, but also support and taking some pressure off the gas that we know there's going to be a lot of gas being built. At the same time, help us because we got to build more nuclear as well. But I think as we think about all the above, we also got to recognize that there's an important role that renewables can and should play as we go forward.
And do we expect coal to come back?
There'll be some coal plant extensions. I mean, I've had a couple of units down in Georgia and even in Alabama that I've extended now to probably to the mid-30s. Otherwise, they would have been retired. But they're providing great value, not just capacity, but providing they're a great energy resource now. And they run very well, and they got all the bells and whistles on them, and they're very efficient. They've been very well maintained. So they're great assets that are at our disposal right now to meet this demand.
But I don't think we'll see new ones. I don't think you'll see new ones. And I do think we will see some new nuclear, whether it's operating the plants that we have across our fleet. We could add 1,000 megawatts just by adding equipment at the existing site. So a whole new reactor coming out of the existing footprint. As I said, we have 2 new reactors in Georgia, and we have a lot of interest in many, many states, from New York to Texas, red and blue, in getting access to electricity that's clean and dispatchable and there when customers need it.
We just got to get the financial models right. We just got to mitigate the risk, and I think that will then give people the incentive and the courage to go forth and do this again.
Mm-hmm. And we know it's not just producing the electricity. We've got to transport it from where it's produced to all the households. When we think about the age of AI, how much in actually grid infrastructure do we have to invest to actually make sure that the U.S. wins the AI race?
Significant.
Yeah.
We do not. We talked about load growth. We talked about what the industry is doing, and we do not see any shortage, and I think Chris alluded to this, any shortage of the need to build out for our customers here in Illinois. Let me put it in perspective. Exelon is putting in $38.4 billion through 2028 in infrastructure upgrades. The majority of that being distribution, but a significant part of that on the transmission system. Because as this goes, we need to have a transmission system that is seamless, and we need to be able to build that sooner. And that has been part of the challenge. We need a national transmission strategy because we can't keep piecemealing this network because electrons flow interstate. And what we're doing is we're tier stepping this approach, and without a solid infrastructure, we won't get to where we want to get. Kathleen referred to energy dominance. We need a strategy, cohesive strategy at the federal and state level to make that happen.
And no, Kathleen, you also referred.
Let me say one thing, and if you look at capital budgets next 5 years, but you look at what's being spent first, what goes first is that transmission. You got to build those wires before you can connect those plants. And so those are the first capital dollars that are being spent. So on that infrastructure.
And Kathleen, you alluded a little bit to nuclear, and obviously in Illinois we have a lot of nuclear power, and we are an energy exporting state, if you don't know that. Talk to me about what role can nuclear play. Give us a couple of examples of what you are planning to do. You talked about maybe getting more energy out of existing assets. What does that really mean in practice?
Yeah, no, it's true. Illinois is, number one in a lot of things, but it is absolutely number one in nuclear, has the most nuclear power than any state, and that's one of the reasons it's got one of the cleanest grids of any state. We've had a lot of change of fortune in the last 15 years, I'd say. Back in 2019, for example, we actually shut off one of our reactors in Pennsylvania's low load growth, low natural gas prices, and nuclear was not recognized in any clean energy policies. But last September, we announced that reactor is coming back online due to a contract with one of the large hyperscalers who's going to fund our investment of $1.6 billion to turn it back on. It happens to be used to be called 3 Mile Island, so you might have heard of it. It's the undamaged reactor at the site, but we're going to rename it after our former CEO, Chris Crane, and it's going to put 835 megawatts back on the grid. There aren't a ton of opportunities to do that. There are a couple other plants that could turn back on, but that's an example of the power of competition and the power of this industry recognizing that clean power and reliable power is so important, saying, I want to be part of that solution. I'm going to help bring this plant back online. I think we'll probably see many more examples of that, both here and across the country. I think these customers, they want to help be part of the solution, and that's one example of it.
Should we be expecting more coming from you?
Well, we don't have any other plants that we can turn back on. Unfortunately, the plants that we had previously turned off over the last 20 years were in a sufficient state of decommissioning where they can't turn back on. But we do have a lot of land at our sites. And in some cases, some of those sites have been already recognized by the NRC as the Nuclear Regulatory Commission as appropriate for additional reactors. So to Chris's point about getting the financing models right, finding sources of capital, finding an off-taker, there are states, as I said, that are actively asking us to do this. We think putting the plant, potential new reactors at existing sites makes a lot of sense. They have community support, they have land, they have water, they have rail, they have all the things you need to add more capacity.
We've all read recently about grid failures, freezing in Texas, issues in Spain, and it's all over the world. Darío, maybe you can help us out. What can quantum do to actually help improve the functioning of grids? And a lot of people talk about grid optimization. What is that really for the average person?
Yeah, but before I get to that, I just want to step back and just reflect how much the context has changed. I mean, when we're talking about, in energy and electricity, we were in a situation where we had flat to slightly declining, right, demand profiles. And what's happening in computing has completely transformed this perspective. And so a couple of consequences that are resulted from that. First of all, we're seeing we want more energy, right? We were debates that came, originally from Europe. You were in a situation there where people are arguing about we want less energy. And the clarity that we want more energy for our future, that is the basis of prosperity and security. And the fact that now we're talking about, I think the aggregate, CSIS did a study on aggregate capital investments, at least planned on total, is I think $2 trillion. And of a combination of the investments that are going to happen in the energy sector and then on the computing side. I think that that's extraordinary news. Even if a fraction of that, right, it's what ends up happening. We have such an exciting journey ahead, and the opportunities that it has. We're talking about talent development, the need for more STEM talent and investment. So I think it's an incredibly exciting time. I think within that landscape, we do think that quantum over time will also have opportunities, as I was alluding to before, in this aspect of optimization as you have varying weather patterns and different variable loads and how you do optimization across all of that spectrum. I think it has the potential, right, to make a difference in how we do the overall sort of grid management. But I just think that this is, and given that we have all of this community here together, this intersection between energy and computing and the scale of the endeavor that we have ahead of us is both daunting but enormously exhilarating. And I just think it's an opportunity that when we do it right and we get it right, is going to position the United States in an incredible competitive advantage. But it begins with that clarity. We want more energy, we want more compute, and we're going to bring those two worlds together in a way that is scalable.
It's clear that optimization is not going to be enough. And from what you're saying, that we're actually going to need to build out. So was the PJM auction, the price that we saw there, was that enough for us to create the incentive that companies need to build new capacity? And what new capacity does it pay for?
I mean, go ahead, Cal.
No, we look at Kathleen.
Yeah. I see a trend here.
We're ready for you. Come on.
I can feel the love.
Yes.
So in yesterday's auction announcement for PJM, which is Illinois' part of the 13 state plus the district region, the auction attracted 2,600 megawatts of new generation. And that is notable because in the last couple of years, there hasn't been very much new generation coming in. It was a slightly higher price. And that's what it takes to bring new power plants online. New power plants are expensive in general. They're very expensive in this market, given what's happening with the economy. So it's a good outcome that there was that amount of new capacity that was attracted by this auction outcome. And then PJM has recently also done a procurement of sort of shovel-ready new projects where they got 10 gigawatts of response through that process, where they'll be able to accelerate interconnection of those power plants that are ready. So you put those two things combined, you say, okay, the market's responding. That's a good outcome, and it's in a competitive market, these are what you expect. You expect people to bid the lowest possible cost that they can to so that they can clear and receive a commitment to run. So I think we need to continue looking at what happens on the demand side. We've talked a lot about the fact that it's not exactly clear how much new load growth we're going to see. We're going to see efficiencies as these computers come online and as the products that they create efficiencies in the economy more broadly. But it's one data point that's positive.
I think what you also can take from PJM yesterday, our governors across those states, one particular, Governor Shapiro out of Pennsylvania, filed a lawsuit which ended up getting a settlement where it set a floor and a cap for that PJM auction. And this PJM auction was at the cap. So what you can take from that is that the price would have been even higher, but for that settlement. So having said that, I think what it also came clear is that we need new supply. And going back to our earlier discussion as that all of the above, I think what you will also begin to see, and states are introducing legislation now, where the utilities may get back into the game of building generation to satisfy a base load where when we get those data centers in there, ensuring that the residential, the small business, and industrial customers are met, and the utilities will feel a need in building generation and owning generation again.
I'm guessing there'll be some debate about that one.
I'm sure there will.
Yeah.
The model where you get to recover your cost plus a guaranteed rate of return, it works great for things that need to be monopolies like poles and wires. In this part of the country, that's not how we do power plants. We make people compete.
It's working really great in Georgia.
It really is.
So there you go.
I can verify that. It works very well. And customers love it. It really benefits customers.
And talk to me about maybe specific power price agreements, which is, sales agreements directly to heavy users. How much are you seeing demand for power price agreements, or is that increasing or more, or are they still concerned about trying to do PPAs tied to renewable energy, or is just about anything goes these days?
I know from our perspective, we've seen a big shift over the past year to 18 months. I mean, early on, the first question was, I want 5 nines of renewable clean power. And then it iterated and migrated to just give me any power you got, whatever you have, I'll take it. And so, and then as we move into the negotiations around the terms and conditions of the contract, I mean, we'll get to pricing, but then it's kind of, what are the minimum terms? What are the minimum bills? What is the upfront payments and all the things that we think are important to protect existing customers? And so the receptivity around that, I think, has been very positive. But more importantly for us, and we talk a lot about, is order, because there's a lot of chaos in this marketplace. And so we try to create order. This is what the process will look like. These are the terms and conditions. These are the provisions. These are the things that we think are important. And I think, and we've seen that as we have these kinds of discussions, we've moved through these processes with these customers, I think, very efficiently.
Fair enough. And in terms of climate, you talk about we're going to need just about any energy. We wanted renewables to we want just about anything we can get. What does that mean for the climate goals that many companies, maybe including yourselves, have made for 2030 or 2050?
For Exelon, we haven't backed away from any commitments we've made. We've committed to be net zero business-driven emissions by 2050. We're transforming our fleet, and that hasn't changed. It is a value of who we are. You do not change your values based on the political, you stick to them, and that's what we've committed to do. And when you look at the jurisdictions we serve, including Illinois hasn't backed off of its climate objectives or its goals. DC has not, Maryland has not. Now what you will see, because of what's happening, is that they may adjust around the fringes, but the commitment is still there. And our goal is to help our communities meet its objectives, and we're committed to it.
Same thing here. I mean, we still have our net zero goal by 2050. I mean, we'll iterate around reductions based on emissions and load factors, but that long-term commitment, that long-term goal, we're standing behind it.
I mean, we already passed the Paris goal. We're 90% clean, so we're a little bit of an outlier in that we always have been, and we will continue to be, a provider of clean energy to customers. And your question about what their goals look like, I think, is a good one. I mean, I think there are many companies that have way more aggressive goals than sort of, a 2050 net zero. They're saying they're going to be carbon free by 2030. And as load grows, that will be challenged. But I guess the important point I think they would make and I would make is they're not going to stop trying. They're not going to stop signing long-term PPAs with clean power producers. They're not going to stop investing in new sources of clean technology. And as we've seen them do in the competitive markets, they're going to try to find ways that they can outcompete their customers. Or their competitors, rather, by showing that they can, be first to this technology or that technology, and to making progress towards their goals.
And I'm very curious, what does adjusting around, on the fringes look like?
Adjusting around the fringes, a lot of that depends on the technology. So, for example, we have goals to convert our entire vehicle fleet to electric or hybrid, but those large trucks will depend on the technology. So we're putting in idle mitigation and the like. So you may have to move some of those back. But within our own house, we're going to meet our goals and meet them on time.
Understood. Much appreciated.
I can tell you're a reporter. Look at you.
And Darío, this is the quantum event. Governor Pritzker just announced that, they lured another investment for the south side of Chicago. He's made quantum a key cornerstone of his policy in the idea of turning the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago into a hub for new technologies. When we think about energy, how important is that in the decision for a company like IBM to make investments in Illinois or in any other state? And if you think about, what advantages do we have as a state to be able to attract these companies and these investments?
Yeah, so we talked about this morning about the power of an ecosystem, and that's how we look at it from an IBM perspective. So the strengths of it that we have been involved for a long time is we've had wonderful partnerships for a long period of time with the University of Illinois, with the University of Chicago, and there's a talent pool and commitment to research excellence that is very attractive to us. We've been long partners also with Argonne and Fermi, and having two world-class national laboratories here is a huge competitive advantage. So first and foremost for us, that was a huge element of the equation, and strengthening that is incredibly important. The second is that the state has made quantum a priority, right? And that sends a beacon signal that it is important, that is committed long term. I think in some of these elements, having that vision and a long-term commitment makes a difference. So the combination of those two factors and the appetite to invest together with us is what led us to increase our commitments in Illinois. And a flagship initiative around that is what we announced last December of the National Quantum Algorithm Center, right? I'm bringing state-of-the-art quantum systems and creating that whole ecosystem around that. So that's how we look at it in investments, is that are the entire element of the ecosystem pool conducive towards allocating our capital and our talent. We have lots of options of where to do that around the world, but that to us is what mark a point of differentiation. And I frankly see a very bright future ahead because as the National Quantum Algorithm Center comes online, and as we make progress on the quantum technology and building really scalable systems and error-corrected machines, I think we're on for an amazing ride. I mean, what we're going to witness in the next 4 years when we have sort of this next evolution, incredibly capable AI systems combined with error-corrected machines, you're seeing two exponentials combined, and humans have a terrible job understanding exponentials, right? And so I think a lot of people are going to see what happens. It's going to seem like something happened overnight. We've seen a little bit of a witness of that in AI in the last few years, but I think we ain't seen nothing yet. And I think Illinois is well poised because of that sort of commitment to these core areas.
And as energy companies, can you tell us a little bit about conversations that you are having with quantum folks? Is it something that started happening in the past year, the past two, or are you getting more calls?
We've had conversations in Atlanta with Georgia Tech for years around quantum computing, and so, but it's in this research phase, and it's always been 3 years away, 5 years away, but that keeps being pushed out. But I do think we're getting closer and recognizing the value and benefits of the quantum simulations and the algorithms in terms of solving incredible complex problems. We see the potential and see the value, and we've supported that research, and we will continue to because there's great benefit there.
And I would say because of where we sit, to Dario's point, our partnership with Argonne, Fermi, University of Chicago, we've been talking about this for well over a decade in some form or fashion. And when PsiQuantum chose Illinois, the CEO said something very interesting. He said, when the governor's office and the utility came out to visit me, it meant something because it showed an ecosystem here in Illinois that was committed to getting us up and running sooner rather than later. And that's very important. So then you take it from the Midwest, our involvement with the government and the military bases in DC and Maryland, and then with Johns Hopkins. So we've been in these discussions for, as I said, well over a decade across the country because this technology is going to lead us into this next phase. And you can't get there without the utility energy company, and we're involved.
And I think one of the big challenges we are seeing as well is a severe shortage of engineers. I think the U.S. already is unable to fill about a third of its more than 400,000 jobs, open engineering roles for every year. When we think about all that's going on, how do we solve that, Darío?
I think that's the single most important problem in our country on this topic when we talk about STEM. When I was given the, I was the chair of the National Science Board that oversees the National Science Foundation, and I was doing my Senate testimony a few months ago, and senators were asking this question. I think this topic of investing enough in ourselves, in the capacity of the domestic capacity of our talent pool, is something where we're falling short. And the thing that we had been advocating in the National Science Board and a broad constituency is that we need kind of the equivalent of a National Defense Education Act 2.0. There was a moment in the 1950s, right, with Sputnik and so on, that led to the awareness that investing in STEM capacity was the key to the success of the nation. And that really spurred a generation of talented scientists and engineers and mathematicians and so on. And we are in a moment where we have to do that again. I'm an immigrant. I think the United States benefits tremendously from attracting talent around the world, but we are an all-time high in our level of dependency on talent from around the world to come. We have to continue to strengthen the ability to attract the best, but we are under-investing in our own people. And so this is an area where we have our work cut out, and it's going to require a new national consensus that starts with local, state governments, and federal government working together. That's not easy to do, but really that's the stake of it. Like, I think we have great technology leadership, we have many things, but we are under-investing in our own talent capacity.
I love that answer and to get that macro view, but I think, and I'm sure this is true here, I know it's true of Calvin, and I'm sure it's true of you, Chris, like on a micro level, we're getting involved in that directly. I mean, we're in the high schools, we're in the junior colleges, we're in the four-year schools, we're setting up programs with the trades so that we can sort of show how important this industry is and how cool it is and how many great jobs there are here. And I know Calvin spends a lot of time with these kids. Like, this is what it takes to get them into the company, to show them that there's a future here. They intern, and then hopefully they're the workforce of the future. I know it's a small thing, but I have never seen our companies be as active on the micro level as we are now to try to get to that macro solution that you mentioned.
Kathleen, Chris, Calvin, Darío, thank you so much for your insights today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.